as we're now moving on, I am very excited to introduce to you our next two world-renowned speakers today. Again, I'm going to share a few highlights from their piece, and then we're going to jump right on in to our enriching dialogue. Today, we are continuing with the conversation around the difficult change. And as we build upon this, we're now going to be discussing it as a coaching conversation about meaning making during times of difficult change with Dr. Carrie Arnold and Dr. Lorraine Webb. We're going to be going in to first talk and share with you with Dr. Arnold. Carrie is the director of the evidence-based coaching program at Fielding Graduate University. She is the principal coach for the Willow Group. She holds 3 degrees from Fielding Graduate University. She's been a little busy, including her PhD in human development. She is a fellow with the Institute for Social Innovation. She continues her postdoc research on voice and silencing. She's a master certified coach and accredited coach training from Georgetown, and she has experience with curricular development and program management. Carrie has served as the human resources and OD leader. She began her private practice as a leadership and executive coach, primarily partnering with leaders in the federal government, in education, and in healthcare. Her nonprofit focus, very different perspective we're bringing into today, has positioned her to work alongside a very diverse group of clients with very strong social justice priorities. She is the author of Silence and Sidelined and How Women Leaders Can Find Their Voices and Break Barriers. Her resources will be available for you in the resource room, which we'll connect you to at the end of today. Lorraine Webb, her partner in conversation today, brings more than 25 years of experience in the utility, pharmaceutical, and manufacturing industries in her role as a trusted coach and advisor, providing counsel to those C-suite executives and senior management. Well, prior to launching her executive and coaching practice as the vice president for the largest municipality-owned gas utility in the nation, Lorraine developed a very strong talent bench with leadership development programs that included coaching for both emerging leaders and senior leaders, building a robust coaching culture that resulted in her organization being recognized as an employer of choice. She takes what she does for others and builds it into her own practical experience. Lorraine bridges her internal coaching background with her skills as an executive coach and helps her clients, as well as her people herself, reach their full potential. So similar to her service as the internal coach, Lorraine also guides leaders and organizations to become more open, diverse, and inclusive. As a graduate of Binghamton University of Management, Lorraine is certified as a presence-based coach, along with a number of different kinds of assessments, and is a member of ICF. So with that, without further ado, we're going to switch now, and I'm going to bring on today Lorraine and Carrie to again have a very conversation-style approach for today. I'm going to share a couple of screens to get us started. Ladies, the time is all yours. Enjoy the next 30 minutes for those of you listening as Lorraine and Carrie share their insights again in the chat, an idea, a question, something being sparked for your own practice, and then we'll come back together again. Lorraine and Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I would just want to give a little bit of not an update in terms of my background. First of all, I do not have my doctorate, but I do have a great deal of experience. I do have a great deal of experience in terms of working in organizations that are floundering or have had severe issues, and how the importance of good guidance in terms of leadership and coaching have been able to turn those organizations around. So that's really going to be some of my focus for my conversation today. Carrie, can I turn it over to you?
Yeah, Lorraine, my friend, it's good to see you, and I'm glad
it's good to see you as well.
Yeah, you know what I did during the last presentation? And I'm curious if anyone has done this in the last couple of years. Did anybody actually ever Google the definition of the word normal? like we talk about the word normal and what is normal, but I was actually Googling the definition of normal because I'm like, what does that word actually fundamentally mean? And I'm sharing that because I think sometimes we miss sometimes the fundamental backbone of a word. And the word means, what's the standard? What's typical? What's usual? What's average? And I think the other thing I wrote down from the true definition of the word normal is, what is the pattern? What is the regular pattern? And I've decided that I might want to outlaw the word normal from my vocabulary, because instead I'm wondering if we would be better served when we talk about what is the standard today, or what is our pattern of living and learning and being today, because we keep talking about the old normal and the new normal. And as I was listening to our two previous presenters trying to define that and make sense of that, it's a really hard conversation to be in. And I realized I'm struggling with that a little bit. And I appreciate what they were outlining, because it actually made me look up that word and think about, how do I want to use the word normal as we discuss challenges, as we discuss disruptions. So I'm just sharing a little bit of what I was doing on the side as I was listening to our two previous Prestige colleagues. But Lorraine, I know you and I talked about before we jumped in that we wanted to hear from our audience. Before I ask the question, though, you were going to say something.
I really, the word normal very much resonated for me. And I love the fact that you found the definition. And I think that what happens is when all of a sudden our moorings seem to be shaken, where all of a sudden something new comes at us, fast and furious, we're clinging and longing for what we thought we had. But the fact is that life changes every minute. And the question is this: how do we stay resilient, focused, and hopeful? And if we've been able to conquer and do certain things, and I'll talk about the organization that I worked with in the past, then we are equipped. We have that resiliency. We should be equipped to meet those new challenges. So thank you very much for that, Carrie.
Yeah, and I think you're making a really important distinction. There's the patterns that are going on around us. And I believe Dr. Chang made this comment as well, but what do I want happening inside of me? And so I can react to the patterns that are happening in society and in organizational settings and in the profession. But what do I want my pattern to be, and my level of reactivity to the patterns around me? And it's an interesting conversation, and I haven't had it yet with some of my clients. And so I'm sitting in that learning. I'm sitting in the mutual learning of what was discussed prior to us coming into this conversation. Go ahead.
So Carrie, I'm going to just kind of respond to that, because one of the things that I, along with another coach, did when the pandemic hit, because we were really feeling a certain kind of way. We felt that we were unmoored. We didn't know what to expect. And we started reaching out to other women. And very quickly, every week we got together on a Sunday and people were able to share their feelings. The thing that we found most was that people were looking for a common community in which to share their anxieties, their concerns, and how to go forward. And it provided folks, about 20 women on a Sunday evening, with an opportunity to, if you will, reset and understand that word normal that you so graciously looked up. And as I was thinking about our presenters before, really spoke very insightfully in terms of what that word meant.
Yeah. I also love the comment that was just put in chat about what does the liminal space look like? How long are we in that liminal space? And how are we managing ourselves in that liminal space? All very important conversations to be in. One of the things that I caution my students in our program here at Fielding and my clients is what I call problem admiration. this sense that let's just get around and talk about all the things that are going wrong in the world and our reactions to what's going wrong in the world. And we like actually to have those conversations. We like to kvetch and collude and recruit people to feel the way we feel. And there's something that's actually very therapeutic about it for like the first 10 minutes. And then it moves maybe something into what I call admiration, which is there's so many things wrong in the world. And oh my goodness, there's this, and that. And we have to be careful that we don't live in that problem admiration, but there's something really, really important and powerful about naming what we're noticing, what we're having feels around, what we're struggling with, what we're resisting, where the tense points might be. And so when we're thinking about coaching and challenging times and educating coaches in challenging times, let's just use chat real quick. Throw in, what are the current context and challenges that you would name? And we'll just do a little bit of problem admiration just to get the stuff out there. And I'll give you some prompts. I mean, right now we're in the middle here in America of midterm elections. That's a challenge that many of us are feeling the tension of because of the political divide in this particular country. So that's one thing I'll name. And the other thing I'll name is that it feels to me that there's so little room for error on certain things, but lots of room for error on others. And I'm noticing this grace, like we're very graceful when it comes to Wi-Fi issues. A dog comes into the room, sorry for the background noise, there's a plumber, working on my bathroom. Like there's a lot of grace there, but when it comes to professional errors, maybe there's less grace. And I'm also noticing at times maybe just a very disconnected workforce in this hybrid world we're in. Those are just some of the challenges that I know my clients and students are facing. Lorraine, what would you add to that list as we wait for our chat to get populated?
Well, Carrie, I love the word giving yourself grace. I would add on that giving yourself space and grace. What I find with my clients is that there still is a lot of agita in terms of what's going to be happening next and how that they can move forward. There's also, though, I think a hunger for learning so that people, as a coach, you're able to provide people with an ability for them to dig deep and to actually understand. Very quickly, I have seen and been in situations, as I'm sure many of the coaches have, where people do not understand the true benefits for reflective coaching so that they can move forward in terms of their career or their personal life. So again, I like the word that you used in terms of grace. I'm going to add on space. And perhaps what we should do is see if there's anything in the chat that we can respond to.
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit in chat. I mean, everything from inflation, climate change, burnout, lack of boundaries, short staff, distraction, lack of focus, employee retention, burnout, impact of systemic racism and colonialism. Big things, really big things. People are overwhelmed, exhausted. There's so much going on. Everyone is beyond busy. There's that word beyond. I love that word beyond. Like we're beyond in so many ways. Yet we're all eager to create healthy boundaries, but that's been elusive. Lack of trust, polarization, lack of dialogue. Whoosh, isn't this fun? This problem admiration, this is awesome. Wars everywhere. I mean, this is so much going on. Yeah, I appreciate Dr. Udo mentioning that. We're all impacted by what's happening in Ukraine. And a lot of fear of the unknown, needing to start from scratch, higher expectations at work, hard to set boundaries, fear of speaking up. I've probably missed some of them, but less margin and greater toll of the disconnect, increasing stress. Yeah, big things.
Very big things, because after reading that and sitting with that for a moment, the first response is, I can throw up my hands, okay? And I'm going to ask you, Carrie, as a person that provides training for coaches, how do you help them deal with these types of situations so that they can in fact, help people move past so that they can be their best?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I really appreciate, Lorraine, that you're asking that. We haven't rehearsed this conversation. We're letting it emerge. Um, as you're looking at this slide, there's a problem with this slide. There's a problem with this visual as we're talking about the knowledge of coaching. And so I'm going to address the problem in the slide by answering your question. And I think sometimes the biggest form of disruption is just being still. And, as I'm listening and reading all of these comments in chat, and I'm reflecting on all the challenges that we are facing as a society, I don't think the answer is to do more, learn more, be more. I wonder if it's the exact opposite. It's breathing and slowing down. And how can stillness be a disruptor? And so as I'm bringing that back into your question of what does this mean for coaching education, we have to be very careful that we're not approaching coaching education as we're learning about coaching, or we're learning a skill set so we can start doing coaching. We need to start framing coaching as a becoming. We're not educating people to do a different profession. We need to reframe it as I'm in a program to become. I'm in a program to evolve into. And I think coaching has to embody more than the clavicle up parts of this human shell, which, we can't be so cognitive focused. We have to look at our entire systems as a way of knowing and learning and being. And so at Fielding Graduate University, where I am the program director, the faculty and I really try to embody presence with our students, introducing them to how hard that really is to be mindful and reflective and still, and to look at how we know in all domains. That is actually a lot harder than people realize, because as our previous speakers mentioned, we have to do our own work first. If I can't be still with myself, I have to do that work first. And so if we're approaching coaching education as, let me just learn theories, let me just learn models, let me just learn skills, I think we're missing some fundamental ways in which our society needs coaching and coaches to operate in the world today. So Lorraine, that's how I would respond to that question.
Yeah, that's a great response, and that resonates for me. I will tell you that before I actually start a coaching session with a person, I say for 2 to 3 minutes, we're going to just sit. And the reason I do that is because I think it's so incredibly important for them to, as well as for myself, to focus on what is going on and what is going to open up for us, so that we don't have this, I guess it's called monkey mind, where we're thinking about what's going on in the past or what's going to happen an hour from now. So I actually take each client through that for every session that we do. And what I get back is, I get back the following: I can't thank you enough, because I can sit, breathe, and focus. So as we're talking about trying to define what the new normal is and what we're rushing to do, to be able to sit in a space quietly for a few moments, I think gives them a great deal of it's not self-satisfaction, but grounding. I'll use that word, grounding. And I think that that's extremely important. So thank you very much for sharing what you did, because, or you do. I don't think coaching, it's important to have the educational background and to learn about what you should be doing as a coach, but I also think it is something that you grow into. So I also understand that when I am coaching someone, I have to listen. And I think it was mentioned earlier, I have to listen so that I can grow. All right. And that is, I think, very key as well.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit more about maybe some of the challenges that university-based programs are facing, coach training organizations are facing, what the International Coaching Federation and other regulatory bodies in coaching are facing. And then what I really want to do is then pivot to Lorraine talking about what it means to be a practitioner in what might be a sluggish system, and how are we blending education with reality. And we know that the pace of change is far outpaces our ability inside an organization to adjust to that rate of change. And so that's probably the biggest challenge I think so many of our leaders are facing. And I know that when we're looking at what does it mean to educate people to become coaches, to be coaches in the world, we have to continuously update what is our understanding of context. So what is our understanding of how people have been impacted by the last couple of years? If that's not incorporated into coaching education right now, then that might be a big gap. Many have argued, I'm not sure I believe this, but many have argued that the pandemic was a great equalizer. Everybody experienced it. Everybody has their story. But I also think we saw huge divides over the past 2 years around privilege and access and equity and healthcare and resources, even Wi-Fi being deemed a basic necessity. Well, we know that many parts, even in our country, do not have good access to Wi-Fi. And so we saw such gaps in social systems. So if we're not talking about that in coaching education, that's potentially a gap, because our clients are most likely embedded in an organization, and those organizations are facing these challenges with their workforce. That doesn't mean any provider of coaching education has the answers. And I think that's what's challenging, is we're reluctant sometimes to bring up topics that we don't have a theoretical underpin to say, here's how, we can address that. We don't know. And I think that's what I love about the previous conversation around mutual learning, is how are we holding space for the not knowing? How are we ensuring that the right conversations are occurring, so that there's a sense-making process, a slowing down to be reflective? I also don't want to dismiss the importance of the theories that have been well vetted over the last several hundred years. They do explain human phenomenon, and some of them are still very relevant. Ones that were recently developed in the last 30, 40 years, and maybe those that evolved in positive psychology and early psychology and leader development stages, there's still really good ways we can make sense of human reactions, even in all of this brand new context. And so I want to make sure that in our program, we're incorporating the not knowing with what has been vetted as a theoretical underpinning, a model, a way of making sense of a human being experience. So in the previous conversation, they talked about theory informing practice and practice informing theory. And I think for us to be really well situated in these challenging times, we have to continue to show fidelity towards the scholarship of coaching and all the bodies of knowledge that help birth coaching, along with but what's happening right now in society today. And that's hard to marry the two, but I think that's the challenge and the opportunity and the invitation for educational programs, for us to really allow good coaches to become. Those conversations need to be occurring. Lorraine, what do you think about what I'm putting out?
I think what you're saying is spot on. And I'm thinking about the organization that I worked in for many, many years. And some of the issues in terms of, if you will, introducing coaching. And very quickly, it was an organization that was going through a great deal of trauma. We talked about the pandemic for those last two years or so, and how that's affected people. Imagine being in a company where one day you walk in and maybe a third of the folks have been retired out, and an organization that might be on the chopping block. How do you get people to galvanize? How do you get people to be, if you will, move into the talent pool and things of that nature? And just very quickly, to answer your question, bringing in coaching is not necessarily the first thing that you do because you're trying to get order and things like that. I want to just focus, though, on the fact that when leadership says that coaching is important, because I understand that the talent bench has to be developed and deepened in order for the organization to survive. And the leadership says, I believe so much in terms of coaching so that we can really develop folks, that becomes important. And Carrie, to your point, bringing in coaches that are educated, sensitive, knowledgeable, but not only that, empathetic, to help move an organization forward is extremely important. My own experience has been, it doesn't happen overnight, all right? And, you know, I show this one, this is an oil tanker, and I love this one because you can't turn an oil tanker on a dime. When you're trying to have effective organizational change, to bring people along, to take down, if you will, the temperature so that they can get grounded in the new normal, so that they can get grounded in the fact that they do have those skills innately or they've learned them in order to perform, that takes time. So I just wanted to bring that up. Does that make sense to you, Carrie?
100%. And I like the framing that you said, we have to take the temperature down. Ralph Stacey has a really lovely complexity diagram that when we're dealing with chaos, we've got to get it pulled down into structure. We've got to get it sort of organized so that we know where everybody is and who's where and who's what. And then we can start to make sense of the complexity and the complication and maybe even drag it back down into something more simple. But we can't throw strategies at something that it's not receptive to even receive. And I think that is something that's so important in what you just said, Lorraine, is that coaching is not the answer to everything. Coaching is a good strategy at a certain period in an organization. And depending on where that organization is, coaches can help facilitate strategies based on different seasons of that organization. But there's this oscillation of in and out, depending on what an organization or a society, a culture, a group of people might be facing.
Right. I think you're right. The ground has to be fertile in order for coaching to be effective, especially if an organization has gone through a great deal of disruption or just general, we are in a state of flux. Because your mind has to be able to settle down and move forward in terms of what's needed. So I agree with you completely on that one.
Yeah, there's this need for spaciousness. Coaching thrives in some form of spaciousness, whether it's the client's ability to be reflective and organization's willingness to allow that spaciousness. But Lorraine, you did work inside of a sluggish system. Mm-hmm. And there's a great question in chat of, what is the reasonable amount of time to integrate a coaching culture? How long did it take you in that organization?
Okay, so I mean, it's a wonderful question. When we start, I think, on an initiative, we think that, okay, we're putting it in place and off we go and everything will be just fine. We introduced coaching, I think, maybe in 2005. Maybe about 2015, it had really taken hold. And there were many reasons for that. Number one, it was an organization, again, that was in a great deal of flux. It was an organization that was hesitant, all right, because I'm dealing with, I don't know if anybody's an engineer, but I'm just dealing with engineers, okay? And this kind of thing was not necessarily in their nomenclature. But we were also trying to bring order to the organization. I knew when coaching had become part of our DNA, when a supervisor came into my office and said, I think so-and-so needs a coach, all right, because they got it, they understood it, they had been through it. The first and most important thing I will say, though, is that the leadership, and this is from an organizational perspective, had to be the first. And the CEO said, if I have a coach, then everybody on the senior team will have a coach. that started the process. But again, there was hesitancy. So it takes a while for an organization, I think, to embrace, especially if they're going through a great deal of change.
And I think what you're outlining is, sometimes as coaches, we think in terms of engagements. This is a 6-month engagement, 12-month engagement. This is a contract that involves this body of work. And maybe that works, but maybe it doesn't. And maybe in like this situation, the patience, especially when you're doing internal coaching, if you're an external coach, sometimes things don't neatly fall into those timeframes. And we're not there sometimes as coaches to even harvest the return on that investment of what we might have planted in 2005 before 2015 hit. But you were operating more as an internal coach during this time, correct?
Absolutely. And it really became my role to do a lot of the coaching with the C-suite. Because as they were making decisions, they needed an internal sounding board, along with myself and some others, as is this the best thing to do? As an internal coach, you are also responsible to be aligned, if you will, with the business, so that you have a clear understanding in terms of what the business needs are, the objectives and the goals. So you wear a lot, because I was the HR person, but I was also the internal coach. We had different types of issues. And my job was to ask the hard questions. And if it meant that, if you will, somebody became upset or concerned or whatever, it's my job internally to say, well, let's think about what the alternatives are so we could walk through them. So to answer your question, yeah, I did wear several different hats, but I was very, very grateful for the opportunity to provide coaching for the seniors, because that really helped in terms of where the organization went.
And I think you're bringing up another really important thing that coaching education needs to be paying attention to, which is systems thinking. Many people go through coaching education because they want to become an independent consultant or a private coach, go into private practice. Those who return into organizations or stay in organizations sometimes are seeing the work from a different ledge, a different perspective. And so there has to be a way in coaching education that we are fundamentally addressing systems thinking and the impact of coaching within those systems. And systems are sluggish, and it does take a time for systems to shift. And so what is the role of a coach in a sluggish system when they're internal versus what's the role of a coach when they're external, maybe contracted to work with one of those clients from the outside in? Different perspectives. And those are the conversations we need to be creating space for.
Right. As an internal, the internal HR person, I also understood that having external coaches would be more beneficial. Number one, did not have the capacity, but having external people come in so that they could have conversations with other individuals in the organizations was very crucial. And if by chance I was missing something, which sometimes happens, you're really ensuring that you're doing the best. I also want to say one more thing regarding coaching. In my private practice, and even in the practice that I had in the organization, a person might be working with a coach for 3-6 months. And then we would stop. We would say, okay, that's enough coaching for right now. And the reason we did it, we wanted to see whether or not people were able to integrate the skills and the behaviors, all right, into their day-to-day operations. And then we would say, after 3 or 6 months, if you need somebody else, another coach, to come in, that is okay, all right? But we want to see how the coaching has been effective and what problems you may or may not have. We also gave people permission that if they had a few questions during that hiatus, especially our senior people, they could reach out to their coach, so that this way they had some type of support.
So in our final 4 minutes, I cannot believe we've reached the end of yet another juicy conversation. We could sit here all day and continue and listen to both of you. I knew you both wanted to ask our audience, those of you who are participating from around the world and listening to all of this in terms of your own lenses and application, we're curious in the chat for you to also share how you're managing your contextual changes and how equipped you are for coach those challenges. Both Carrie and Lorraine, in our final 4 minutes together, what would you like to share with us, or what would you like to ask our GSAEC community?
Go ahead, Lorraine.
Well, I think that I am going to go back to the issue of, I'd like to know what other strategies other coaches use in order to ensure that their coaching engagement with the client that they've worked with has been, if you will, successful, and whether or not they reach back to find out how they're doing. And that's a real practical question, but I know I use that, but I would be curious to hear what others do.
And I think the question I'm sitting in, along with everything else, is how am I keeping my instrument sharp? You know, the instrument itself. We are coaches. We are an instrument. And how are we equipping ourselves for constant change, constant standards changing, new patterns developing? How are we pivoting amongst all of that? And I know for myself, it's being in conversations like this with other coaches, being in community with other coaches is definitely part of staying sharp as an instrument. But how are we equipping ourselves and sharpening our instruments, I think, is a really good question to add to the reflection that's already there.
Mm-hmm.
Other final thoughts in our last minute or so together. What can our GSAEC community not leave today without hearing? One sentence, one statement, your final thing before you leave today. This is something to know, to understand, or to think about. Final thoughts. I'll start with this time with Carrie, and then we'll wrap up with Lorraine.
Yeah, I would say constant learning. You're never done. You know, what are you reading? What coaching book is on your nightstand? What articles? You have to be in a constant mindset. It's part of the coaching mindset that the International Coaching Federation here talks about, which is, you know, how are we constantly growing, learning, developing? GSAEC has those academic standards as well of always being in a learner mindset. That would be the thing I would want everyone to just put in their mental crock pot, as one of my faculty members likes to say.
I think that that's great. I would echo that, but I would also add, I guess I would add the following, that we should always be mindful that we are resilient and that we are able to move through change, and to know that we can be successful. I think the final thing that I would say is, as coaches, and this is my mantra, I'm supposed to be of service. I am supposed to be of service. It's not about me. It's about that individual that I'm talking to, that I have a relationship with, that I'm learning from. But most importantly, I'm supposed to be of service.
Well, we want to thank both of you for choosing to be a service to us at GSAEC and to the international coaching community who is joining us today. This has been just so juicy. So with that, I could listen to both of you all day. Lorraine, we could talk for a day about that application and that question, because I'm getting that same question from the clients. How do we make sure this is sticking? How do we make sure this is working? What do we do next? How do we build upon it? How do I support the person who just got coached? So let's make sure this is the start of a conversation for everyone here and not the last one.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. This has been a pleasure, and Carrie, a real pleasure.
Thanks, Lorraine.